Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
You're
Where did you
human.
grow up again?
I'm from Santa Cruz, California, but don't hold that against me. You know what I mean?
I'm going to LA tomorrow, so.
Okay. Yeah. I did live in LA for a long time. That's how I knew Ian Crossland. We lived in Venice Beach at the house that Jim Morrison used to squat at, that the Doors, Ray Manzarek's house was. Venice Beach, 59 and Navy. And so I did live in the Venice scene. But I grew up with like Wiccan lesbians in the redwood forest with redwood diaper babies. You know, the red diaper babies? We have redwood diaper babies.
I bet they're like Marxists, but they're much more spiritually in touch.
In a weird way. It's weird.
Yeah.
I used to think I was cool because I came up with this term transcendental Marxism, but I realized I didn't really come up with that. That's just.
No, that's a thing. Yeah, that's been a thing since. That's a lot of the hippie communes, like Bernie Sanders was kicked out of in the 70s.
Dude, yeah, they love Marx, they love Owenism, and they love Blavatsky. I don't know.
Well, I want to talk about Ukraine because it's a great, opportunity since you're less constrained by sort of, topical constrictions. Like what my perception of it, why, I'm agreeing with the left a lot more in Ukraine than I am with the right thought leaders, which is a first for me.
Right. Whatever that means, right? About neoconservatives, though, too. So, I mean, there's also Poland. Your dad. I recently was watching Man in High Castle, and I was like, this is about Poland. That's all this is. This idea that the fascists won and they've got this, advanced civilization that's under the thumb of somebody. Yeah, that's Poland. So I feel like you had a lot you could say.
Where's your family from? Are you Serb?
I'm Croatian.
Croatian. I was just in Croatia again. I spent a lot of time in Croatia.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're not pro-Russian, the Croats. The Serbs are a bit more, but
more. But you know what? The Balkans are between a rock and a hard place. Russia owns so much of the industry there. I mean, all over the former Yugoslav republics, and
it does frustrate a lot of Croats how many Russian mobsters have just bought up places. But
but not just that. They own banks. They own cinema chains. They own convenience stores. They own a lot of strategic industries, and so they have influence from that. And then they also. Yugoslavia as a whole, the six member constituent states, they had a different kind of experience under the Iron Curtain because of Tito's strength than anyone else in the Iron Curtain did. People don't recognize this.
No, it's crazy. I mean, the ability of become the third world doesn't mean the third class. It means the third option. It means social medicine and denim jeans. I don't know, whatever they're planning. But let me, if you're down, let me start to kind of introduce you a bit, if that's all right. Yeah. So basically, this is my buddy Matt. Matt's one of the most interesting people I know. I'm probably one of the least interesting people Matt knows. He's all over the world hanging out with Nigel Farage, and you were just with JJ.
Well, JJ must be.
Well, I mean, John S. Johnson is going to, it's an important character. You're around the Slavic heroes and the world-changing scene. I don't want to introduce you wrong, though. Maybe you want to explain.
Great, dude. You're doing great. Loving it. Keep going. You're killing it.
Well, okay. To one Slav to another, also kind of interesting that your dad was involved with like the jazz scene, which is another huge thing. So you come from kind of a perspective of what the world could be. And then, you've been also, and you were friends with James O'Keefe and like through Veritas, you've been doing a lot in America, not just in Europe and around the world, but basically all over the place and just meeting people and trying to figure out what's going on. I don't know. You're also an economist. How have I done? What do you think? Give me a grade.
Yeah, dude, I'm a dilettante. I just do a lot of stuff. And
the Renaissance man. It is what it is.
Yeah, well, I do things I want to do, and there's a lot of cool stuff to do. So politics and markets and economics and media and journalism and Project Veritas is a big part of my life, and I'm on the board. That's how we met when James went down to hang out with Tim and do the show. So, but Europe, I lived there part time. I'm a Polish citizen, and you kind of introduced my father. He's a 20th century anti-communist dissident writer in Poland, and also introducer of jazz. I mean, he's a fascinating story. I just watch final cut of a movie that's adapted from one of his books. And hopefully this will get a foreign film nomination for the Oscars.
Wow.
keep an eye on it. It'll get distributed widely. I think it'll get seen. It's called Philip, which was my father's most autobiographical novel about his experience during the war, where he was a Polish Jew who passed himself off as a Polish Frenchman serving the high-ranking Nazis a soup as a waiter in the Grand Hotel in Frankfurt, which was the capital of the sort of Nazi Reich machine. So all sorts of cool history. I don't even know where to go. I know you and I have talked a bunch offline about Ukraine, and that's been obviously an interest of mine. I'm kind of going against a little bit of the right-wing grain here, just because I'm so close to the scene there. I've lived in Poland part-time for the last now 12 years. And, all through different turmoil in Ukraine in 2014 and obviously more recently. So it's like I've been to Ukraine many times. And a lot of the coverage from the right on Ukraine has bothered me to no end. So I wanted to use this forum to talk about that in depth a little bit, just because that's, we have a great forum to do it where it's freewheeling with you and me, and we understand the Slavic world. So.
Right. I mean, it's kind of interesting because you've got this really American abstract. We see Americans looking at this, and it's interesting because the left and the right are basing it on what they know, which isn't Russia or Ukraine, it's themselves. So they're saying, oh, well, we know America is like this. And so some of them are saying, yeah, we should really go and we should do this thing because we trust America. And the others are saying, well, we don't trust America because America's done all these other things. So really, could we be the good guys? Because it's a very Vietnam ideology.
Yeah, you're right. This sets up a lot like Vietnam. Sometimes there are no good guys. Sometimes not everybody is motivated by pure bad and they have rational self-interest in play. These are nuanced things. You phrased it really well there. I hadn't thought about that facet of it. Certainly with the globalists, the UN, the EU, the US deep state, which was at odds with Trump, the State Department class, the think tank class, the Atlantic Council. But you're right. They're spinning it in a frame that Americans can only try and create a sort of analog with, which is like, this is our view of things. They don't understand Russia, and they certainly don't understand post-communist Iron Curtain nations that came out of it, the transitions and the political culture, the economic culture on the ground there, and then what the people want. There's always something when I've tried to explain Poland, and I've never been able to do it, even with members of Congress, House members, senators. When I go with friends of mine from Poland, and we try and explain some of the things on the ground. There's always a game behind the game because it's still communist in some way. It will always be communist on the level of governance and philosophy of governance until those who are educated under communism are gone from the scene. Until then, it cannot be, some sort of framework of Western classical liberalism or constitutional republicanism or democracy. It just won't. I mean, you see this with the state-owned enterprise in every one of the countries you and I were talking about a few minutes ago, in the Balkans, in Central Europe. So it's super interesting, but it's not easy to explain. And
no, I mean that's actually, I think you hit it on the head there with like quasi business, quasi corporate, quasi state run businesses. I mean, it's America had failing mining factory towns, right? And then the Soviet Union has their oblasts, right? This is the mentality. How do we sustain what we need to sustain so that we can keep having our system going, and vice versa as well from Russia. And we keep thinking, okay, well, America, we've done some pretty horrible things. Everyone has done some horrible things, but I mean, look what's going on right now. It's like there's an objective body count. There's an objective human.
Right. Only one side on this dispute is endorsing as a statutory policy in their warfare mass rape as a weapon of war. Only one side.
Right.
And so like the equivocation I see from some on the right, but NATO has encroached on Russia's near abroad. Or my favorite is the bioweapons labs. We've had bioweapons labs in dozens of countries, hundreds of them since the 80s and 90s. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't even call it bioweapons labs. Bioresearch facilities, where part of course, what you do in bioresearch is what's going to be a weapon used against us, what is a weapon we may use proactively in an offensive framework. And these things have existed. They're not even classified. You go through Senate and House Appropriations Committee records and notes and minutes.
I see on YouTube, Kazakhstan's embassy YouTube videos will show you their bio research facilities, if we don't want to call them a lab.
And most of the reason that they were funded in the first place was under the auspice, whether it was good faith or not, that we're in a globalizing world and there's more travel and interdependence and more things like pathogens that can spread around the world, as we just saw with the Wuhan flu, which was a bioweapon in my view, and timed exactly what it was by design out of China. But the idea that, well, you know what, if we're going to work together around the globe, then we should probably be able to, analyze what are global threats, which pathogens, as we've seen, are. And so the U.S. takes lead on this because the U.S. is the imperial hegemony of the 20th century. Fukuyama was not right about a lot of things, but he was right that America basically won the greatest sort of bipolar global battle between communism and led by the Soviet Union and the West. And their fight against sort of the unipolar world, they don't offer much. They offer propaganda and coercion. So maybe there will be some level of multipolarity developing, maybe out of Africa. But right now, it is pretty unipolar, and that's a good thing. There hasn't been World War III since World War II ended in 1945, led by America. And I don't want to sound like a globalist, but the whole world's economic prosperity has increased because countries that trade together don't make war. And it's only those that are incapable of real competition that then come up with other metrics and frameworks in which to win. And that's what we see out of Russia, their revanches in the last few years.
But don't we also see a lot of, this goes back to the idea of Western liberalism. If Poland can't play the game, right, and start to dress up and sound and mimic, and watch American 100 pop hits on MTV like everybody else, then Poland doesn't objectively meet the progress meter because it's progression towards their.
For Breitbart for years was when I was writing under Bannon about Poland and the culture war going on. The people who are a Catholic society voted for this, and the EU has been up their ass nonstop with bullshit. Right. And trying to censure them along with Hungary on rule of law because their peoples are rejecting this level of Western liberalism or Western liberalism, progressive radicalism on steroids. Disguised as basic liberalism, because in Europe, as the liberals are the conservatives. You call it conservative liberalism. The liberals are the ones that want freedom. It's like before in the U.S. when FDR co-opted the word and starting with Woodrow Wilson's progressivism, birthing that in the early part of the 20th century, and FDR co-opting the concept. Liberalism was, instead of freedom of opportunity and just liberty, where the word comes from. In the classical liberal Voltaire Montesquieu sense, it was freedom from want. The government will step in and give you freedom by their diktat, by their fiat. They'll create it for you by giving you everything and growing government. And that's at odds with real liberalism, which is controlled and minimized government.
It's Aristotelian republicanism, right?
A great Central European, Ludwig von Mises, who was born in Lviv when it was part of sort of Austro-Hungarian, Polish Galicia before, now it's part of Ukraine. But he said that every law is essentially a negation of liberty. And on some level it is. As a society, we have a compact and we bestow legitimacy on those who control that, because we do have Edmund Burkean values and right and wrong. We're Judeo-Christian societies by and large, at least in the West and all over Europe. And it's, thou shalt not murder. Okay, you know what? That negates my pure liberty to murder the guy next to me. But in society, we are happy that law is codified in a constitutional republic. So liberty, should be pushed, and it has been somewhat successfully. And Russia's never had a culture of any form of liberalism. Poland and other parts of Europe have. Russia's always been under. You read 19th century Russian literature, you see the Russian soul is one of a sort of draconian controlled regime is embraced. That's to them order. I actually believe that comes from geography is destiny, and it's the most oppressive regime, or the most oppressive climate, the most oppressive geography, and thus it has birthed and born the most oppressive regimes across these massive, in Russia, 13 time zones, and the largest mass area of any society in world history. And
one could also argue like Ottomans and Catholic serfdom, this idea of feudalism, Islam means servitude as well. We've got this kind of, that's another, they're trying to connect with this idea. Tyrmand, Dugan had talked about this as well. Like there's a connection between the Arab world and Russia.
Totally. Yeah, and I would say, I'm not a cultural relativist. I would say the West is better than theocratic jihadi states or Islamist states. Everywhere where there's an Islamist state, with a couple of exceptions, Morocco, for instance, which has embraced a lot of Western ideals. Turkey under Ataturk, and we see how it is when it's sort of pendulum shifting back under Erdogan, who is an Islamist. That is certainly more oppressive than it was. Turkey was a bastion of the Islamic world because of the Western liberalism in the classical sense, the liberty focus.
Well, we can agree, I think, on the fact that it was more liberal. But can we agree, and let's pretend that we're more Californian here than we are? Let's be subjective about what's better for a second, because And I think this is the real crime here. If Poland is being forced to become more Western, and that comes with it human trafficking and kiddie porn, and if Ukraine's going through that and they have even less relativism because they didn't even experience the same version of Taurus Bulba. I mean, this is what I'm thinking. We're kind of putting Ukraine in a position where we have to really trust that Western Atlanticist liberalism is safe for kids, right? Is it going to be, I mean, because maybe they are better off with authoritarianism keeping them safe from us.
No,
Again,
the reason why Dugin is so worrisome is because a lot of what he says makes sense to those who want to hear the reductio ad absurdum of his argument, which is, and my father said the same thing, and the old saying that American style democracy is the best of all the worst systems, but it does bestow the most freedom, and it bestows the most ability of the populations to always check through legitimacy, through the Republican structures in place to make sure that rulers and leadership has that legitimacy. Of course, we see with the American left, the coercion and the chicanery, the stolen election of 1920, which I know was stolen because I did a lot of the journalistic work in many of these states. This is not new. This is Chicago 1960 deadboat. This is Boston Irish getting off the boat and saying, hey, join me in my public sector union, join my machine. You get a job, just vote this way, the Chicago ward system. So this stuff does exist. Pure democracy leads to mob rule, and mob can be coerced. That's why we're a republic, if we can keep it, as Ben Franklin said, in a republic that's grounded in a Judeo-Christian ethos of morality, of right and wrong. Do we stray from that? Oh, all the time, because people are fallible, original sin. But what Dugin sells is that the Western liberalism and the radical progressivism that gets birthed from that, which it does, and you look at the Frankfurt School, you look at the New School in New York in the first half of the 20th century, and all the Marcuse type figures and Gramsci's, what they did in culture and then politics, is that they would try and degrade it. They would try and, the ends justify the means, and then they trend back toward that sort of autocratic socialism, communism, where it's controlled by a few. It becomes a plutocracy, and that legitimacy cannot be checked. So Dugin doesn't say all 100% bullshit. He says things that a lot of people in the West on the right want to hear, which is why this love affair has commenced. I just think it's incredibly misplaced, and it comes from a place of not understanding Russia, the Russian soul and ethos, and not understanding Ukraine, certainly in our contemporary debate. And what Ukraine had 50 million people, 52 million people had peaked in the early 90s after communism fell. And then it just went straight down as immigration corridors opened up to them. And then it was 48 million for a while. Now, most recently, it was about 44, going toward 40 during this crisis, a 10% population drop. And and Ukraine is a very unhealthy place. A lot of the right is correct in their assessment. It's the most corrupt money laundering cesspool that exists. I did the work with Peter Schweitzer on Burisma and Hunter Biden and his board affiliation there, years ago. And then I did more stuff on Hunter Biden, worked with Peter on other things. And we harbor no fallacy over what Ukraine is with the oligarchy that they had in place from the dirty transition. Big country, 45 to 50 million people, a lot of post-communist structures that transitioned with no accountability and became gangsters and oligarchs in the Russian sense. So it's been a hotbed of that. And yeah, they did the same thing that the Polish, they call themselves center-right, but the Eurocentric Poles that are leftists, a lot of them were communists.
Right.
They recognize that the EU is giving them a hatch, an escape hatch, where they can, get it. If they could get the euro, especially, be a more liquid currency in which to convert their plunder into mansions in the Med in France, south of France, or Italy. So I mean, but the lack of understanding of these complexes in Ukraine is, it goes to that point, really good point you made before. They're looking at it through the perception of a Western framework, of America, of Europe. It's not that. And it is generations away from being that if it does get to it. And right now will be the hinge point if it's going to continue on that trend. I was in Ukraine multiple times. I spent a lot of time in the Ukraine sort of hinterlands and in politics and policy, seeing the people fighting, even Yanukovych and the Maidan, which I'm seeing, righty commentators say was just a CIA color revolution. I know the people who were fighting. I know the people who were taking the bullets that Yanukovych, the then president who was deposed in a honest revolution, it only had the mandate from the people. Maybe the CIA exposed his DACA with his Siberian tigers, which helped trigger and catalyze this. Maybe, the U.S. embassy in Kiev had some role in that. but the people had to topple the government. It was too big a complex with all of Russia behind it. He was propped up by Russia. It was another Belarus to some degree. And then I watched, after his deposition, the people get freer. I invest in Ukrainian tech startups and Ukrainian tech entrepreneurs who go around Europe, super educated. I've got friends in civil society there, think tanks who are trying to liberalize in the conservative sort of classical sense. And build a more honest governance structure. I know the youngest parliamentarian, Sviatoslav Jurash, who's a Ukrainian nationalist in a good way, the same way I'm a Polish nationalist and an American nationalist. And he wanted a more honest 21st century modern Ukraine. And now he's, on patrol with an AK-47 around the streets of Kiev. And actually, he was just in Donbass. He was going out to the front. So, and, his stories, and I trust him. He's an honest young guy, 26, 27. I mean, the stories of the people he knows, the landmines, the limbs being blown off, the mass rape, the murder of senior citizens, the rape to death of old women and young boys. That's happened in Kherson and Mykolaiv, all over, certainly in the East. People renditioned to Russia, being pushed into slavery, women into sex slavery, men into work camps. They've lost, at a minimum, 50,000 citizens have been renditioned from Eastern Ukraine, Ukrainians. And by the way, a lot of the Russian-speaking East doesn't want to be under a new Soviet Union either, which is why there's been success in defending some of these cities.
Yeah, there's some Russians that aren't super excited about Putin coming back if they've lived.
No, of course not.
Lived outside of there for a reason,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I shouldn't laugh, but it's an important thing that you're talking about, and it's really it reminds me of Yugoslavia because in the 90s nobody could handle that there was 1930s, 40s Germany stuff going on in suburbia in the 90s. It was just hard to handle. There are soccer fields of graves places. But I mean, that's the thing with that American framework. So it makes me wonder, I mean, Ukraine is headed towards this thing. What can really be done? And then also you just brought up Biden, Hunter and everything else, all of these different things. What's the cost, right? Because if we there's the wrong people are in charge right now. If we're handing them the Ukraine, what are they going to do with it?
Yeah, well, that's what they were doing. It was a playground of globalist, corrupt cronies. A lot of people remember the Panama Papers,
right?
Something Fonseca, the law firm. A lot of people tied to Ukrainian oligarchs laundering money through shell companies and
Medvedev too. I mean, they're both doing it.
Yeah. No, I mean, we know how corrupt the Dem is. I mean, Dem machine is. We just have to go on a local level to Chicago or look at what the Clintons and Terry McAuliffe were doing with things like Solyndra. These people are uber corrupt. And I shudder to think where the 40 billion on that largest allocation of capital and aid has gone, with no inspector general oversight attached. It's insane. I wouldn't advocate for that. I advocate for certainly sending them weapons. It is in our best interest to have Ukraine not fall under Russia's thumb. Right? If Russia takes Ukraine, especially right now, if they take Odessa, which doesn't look like they will. And keep in mind, I sent you that string from that Russian military paratrooper who really wrote his experience. It's a Potemkin society. It's Chernobyl. The miniseries where you see that this is still communism in sort of effectiveness. Everybody just lies to their superiors so that they don't get gulagged immediately. And the whole system is built on fear, not merit. So the military's Potemkin. I don't think they're going to take over much. They might be able to defend what they've held. But if Russia takes Ukraine, takes Odessa, they've set up Transnistria to take Moldova, so they can be right up on NATO's weakest flank, which is Romania, which is much more corrupt than Poland and just as corrupt as Ukraine. And by the way, it's an EU member and a NATO member. They can, they carved off pieces of Georgia in 2008 with South Ossetia and Abkhazia. They carved up a region that sort of abuts Armenian Azerbaijan. So this has been the grand design for 20 years is find the timing where you can start the real revanchist project. They tried in 2008 with Georgia. Lech Kaczynski really got the world working with Saakashvili and Bush and then even Obama to say, no, we don't want to see this on any of our watches. They all still had a recent enough memory of the Cold War to say revanchist Russia is not good for the world. And I disagree with a friend and mentor, Steve Bannon, when he said, well, otherwise we didn't make outrage with Russia, they'd end up in Chinese alliance. Well, they were always going to. They're both systems that are fruits of the same poisonous Marxist tree. They both come from that. It's Putin's a KGB agent, and the structures and the people in charge were all communist leaders. And in China, it's a CCP that still worships Mao. So it wasn't the liberalization of of Deng Xiaoping. It wasn't, the good faith attempts in the 70s under Nixon. They created a new system. They can exploit the world using, it's like the old saying, they'll sell the capitalists the rope with which they would hang them. And economically, they've done so over the 25 years with offshoring jobs and racing to the bottom in labor costs. And we had a globalist class that was happy to make money hand over fist doing that. Open borders capitalism. So I am more of an economic nationalist now because that's also part of our self-interest, protect industries from players like China. But Russia was always going to end up in their arms. They share a border. They have a similar worldview. They have similar internal governance. They have similar allies around the world. Great axiomatic leaders of free societies like Algeria, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea. No coincidences. These are the Iran. Not any players that would wish for a peaceful world. They're players that would coerce and use force, kill their own citizens, kill foreign citizens to get their way, get ahead, and accumulate power. So this lack of comprehension over what I view as the realpolitik is upsetting to me because I see a lot of people I like on very much what I know to be the wrong side of things because they don't understand the nuance. But hey,
open-minded.
George Soros supports Ukraine, so we got to support Putin. Sometimes it's not that simple as the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right. I mean, I think you put that very well. I think it's a strange situation though, because you have to worry about what the consolatory circumstance will be. I can only imagine that it would be worse, that certain amounts of, not worse than it was before, that they'll continue with what they're doing and expedite the process, and there'll be more human trafficking, more problems and everything else. Having said that, we look at the rest of the world and I wonder, is it really America that is the one that can and ought to save Ukraine? Because, or is it, we looked at the European Union, the United States, and NATO, and all these powers that are presenting themselves as as you said, a unipolarity. That's more and more fascistic. No, I mean, is it becoming a thing that we're supposed to be concerned about, or should it be these smaller countries like India that's been going and trying to interact more?
Well, my view on American engagement in Ukraine, at no point have I ever said that America or NATO should send troops. They're not a member of the bloc. And at no point do I think that Ukraine should join the EU or NATO. I mean, then you're just throwing out all form of statutory standards out the window because of politics. They do not meet the standards. They have a lot of cleaning up to do. I don't think Turkey should be a member of the EU as it was trying, nor should it be a member of NATO. But it is a member of NATO, and you need unanimity to eject it. And it's trying to now play some sort of intermediation role to preserve its position in NATO. But I do not think that we should be in hock to bottomless pools of money, and then also other even more troops. What we should do is give them weapons, just for the simple reason, the same way we would send food to Africa during drought and famine. It's a form of relief and aid. They are the ones aggressed upon, and we have a rational self-interest to make sure they defend themselves. And moreover, every male in Ukraine from the age of 12 to 80 wants to take up arms and defend the country. They don't need troops. They do need weapons. And I think the West has behaved somewhat well in aiding them in that way. Certainly, I do not like the opportunism of the Biden administration writing a $40 billion check with no oversight. That's going. We know where that's going. Some will get to Ukraine. A lot will get grifted.
Yeah, and simultaneously, though, we're looking at, Europe is dismantling itself as much as it can while trying to force parts of Europe to join something that is already a sinking ship, right? So Brexit's happening, but also Greece is being swallowed up and forced to follow all these We're seeing this Back to the Future movie. We know what could happen to Ukraine if they get put into what happened to Greece already. Greece is already forced.
The thing is, and this is where again I take odds when I hear about Nazis in Ukraine, or it's a horrible society. It's a lot more godly, a lot more pious, a lot more a much stronger restriction on abortion than Russia. And there's a lot more Nazis in Russia. Putin would do motorcycle rides with these people all through the hinterlands to push for support for decades. There's not many Ukrainian neo-Nazis, and those quote-unquote neo-Nazis were, Sea of Azov Brigade was funded by a Jew. They support their half-Jewish president. They're not doing neo-Nazi real well.
They're not very good at it, right?
No, they're not very good at it. It's another, misinformational construct. But you make a great point on Greece, and I've written tons. I wrote a piece for the American Mind which is the Claremont Institute, where I'm a fellow. They're one of their online journals called Go Westphalian Young Man, where I talked about the rise of the EU and the EU abrogating its own rule of law with Greece and Italy during the debt crisis that came after our crisis in 0809. The contagion was there, and German banks were really the lead funders of the profligacy of the Club Med states all over Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece, and the pigs, we call them.
Right.
And they were over levered because German banking made money building that sort of Ponzi. And then when it came time to, revert to some sort of real valuations that would wipe out German banking or hurt them, impair them, then all of a sudden the Troika came in, heavy-handedly deposed freely elected sovereigns in both Greece and Italy, and put in their Goldman Sachs technocrats. And I've written all about that in this piece, Go Westphalian Young Man. So I mean, I'm certainly I was a big proponent of Brexit. I'm a big proponent of Quit-Italy. When Italy might be the next shoe to drop, I talk about Polexit in Poland, which is not popular because EU infrastructure funds have helped build Poland, and Poland is, behind the Iron Curtain. A lot of the Slavic oppressed countries and peoples see the ability to integrate with Western Europe as like the real bringer of modernism, 20th century, 21st century freedoms and opportunity. And I'm certainly not averse to the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. When it's done on sort of bilateral and multilateral, but eyes wide open bases, not just forced multilateralism by hegemons like France and Germany in the EU, German economic project, French academic project. That's how the EU got built.
Right.
But these kind of, again, like people who trade together, countries and societies that trade together don't make war. Not a bad thing to, by treaty, agree to suspend restrictions on these movements. But you're right. The EU is a leftist project. It's totally out of the French Academy, and it's doing what we all would expect it to do: trying to assert more and more power and contravention of mandates from the people. If the people vote wrong, we'll rehold the referenda, like they did in Lisbon, like they did with the Austrian presidency with Norbert Hofer.
You might have already said this to an extent, but maybe to reiterate. So, do you think that that the liberal systems are functional enough that we can fix them from the inside at all, or do we have to Brexit? Do we have to accept that these are Marxist, ideologically driven con artists?
All of those, Central European nations, post-communist nations who are in the EU now want to be what they call Euro-realist and fix it from within. I'm not sure they can. I'd rather just see the thing go kaput. Belgium, Brussels should go back to what it was, which is a place to get good mussels and chocolate, and look at a shitty little statue in the center of a little boy peeing in a fountain. Like, that's all Brussels should be. Strasbourg should be a capital of Alsatian cuisine with a great cathedral. But it should not be a seat of power, because those in power are those we're always trying to freely electorally depose. So I don't trust these people at all. And I don't think Ukraine should even want to be in there. I can understand in their short interest why they would. It's a much more defensive posture and position to be in, should they be with any of these blocs, the EU or NATO. But it is a conservative society, and they do want to achieve modernity the way Poland has, the way Czechia has, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, even some of the more lagging Balkans, Albania and Bulgaria. And Bulgaria is run by a cartoon character, Boyko Borisov, an EU member. I'm very entertained by him, by the way. If I could meet any head of state in EU or in Europe wide, I think he'd be my guy. I think I'd want to meet him. I met JJ, who I love, absolutely love him, in Slovenia. Great anti-communist dissident.
Right.
And conservative, real conservative. But you see
conservative of classic liberalism, or whatever we're really calling
conservative liberal, as you call them.
Yeah, it's weird because the idea of liberalism has been this idea that's constantly moving. It has no destiny. It has to continue on. So people can be running along with it, but then it continues on. So it seems weird that we focus on terms that the person, if you were to judge them in 40 years, that you couldn't use the same term for them anymore.
Yeah, well, certainly, the whole idea Woodrow Wilson let this cat out of the bag in the 1900s, first from Princeton University and then as president of progressivism. And liberalism as progressivism, I think it's a co-option of concepts. progressivism leads to less liberty. So I believe it's at odd with liberalism, but their co-option has been successful. And they've made liberalism into this conceptual framework of we are progressing as a society. And part of that progression and progressivism is to banish traditional values, which is the mooring of society, the Judeo-Christian ethos, right and wrong. If we are a Soviet man, as Dugin says, a godless communist, then the Politburo is God, and we know that ends in gulags.
I feel like Zizek says that, but I'll take it. It's
Zizek's not wrong about everything. And then in the West, this progress that, okay, well, it's not liberalism in the classical sense, it's libertinism. We're going to destruct what is gender. We're going to deconstruct what is, marriage and traditional family. I always say that, my father said that conservatism is or liberalism in the sort of modern sense, progressive sense, is a philosophy of conscience. What feels good is good, versus conservatism is a philosophy of reason. We have many thousands of years of the human condition to know that some things do work, that a mooring under the Judeo-Christian ethos of, say, the nuclear family, thou shalt not murder, that there is a God, there's a higher power, so that man cannot become God in a Nietzschean framework, which then paves the way for Nazism and mass murder and massacre to effectuate the perfect humanity. Every utopianist text, whether it's Brave New World, 1984, Sir Thomas More, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, describes what at first is sold as a utopia, but you don't have to scratch the surface far to see it's really a dystopia, because these controlled systems from the top down do not lead to freedom, do not lead to individual preservation of rights and rights of the minority. So when the liberalism left unmoored of the modern sense, it's a disaster. We see what's going on in the West. We see drag queen story hour. We see, all sorts of things. I don't need to have a big C conservative culture war debate, or go there with this. But I mean, we know that this stuff doesn't work. Transgender bathrooms, Leah Thomas at UPenn swimming. I mean, the whole thing is ludicrous. And 100 years from now, human beings, I think, in the West are going to look back at this and say, these people are insane.
Right. And what's wrong with transgender bathroom? No, I'm just kidding. Let's save that for another one. Anybody you want that, get that on another podcast. But for this, I was going to ask you more about economy. Is it true, do you think, that it's not a left or right divide as much as it is a bureaucrat economy divide? Do you believe in bureaucracy or the economy to fix things, right? Or what do you think?
I think the dichotomy best broken down would be populist versus globalist. Globalist saying that from the top down, we can organize things through our cabals, whether they're in international governance, extra governmental, so without mandate or legitimacy, the technocrats of the UN, of the EU, of the State Department, who don't have legitimacy through democratic mandate, through electoral mandate, but they want to move the chess pieces around the board, and they work hand in glove with global corporatism, where there's a race to the bottom in labor costs and input costs in pursuit of short-term profit. Okay, hey, we just hollowed out, half of the American Rust Belt, and everyone's addicted to fentanyl, but you get cheaper iPhones because the parts are made in China.
Right. And this or in Idaho pretty soon.
And this is the AEI sort of model, which is absolutely a hollowing out of the working classes. Tucker says it well. Are you a country with an economy or an economy with a country? I think you're a country first. And obviously you want to do what you can to free up the economy, make it competitive and meritocratic, but it can't be, to a libertarian degree of totally deregulated to, a free for all. Because at that point, they'll degenerate into cronyism, which is what we've seen out of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Chamber of Commerce was a Republican Party organ for 3 or 4 generations. The Mitt Romney style country club Republican that you can lampoon as the monopoly man.
Don't leave Lizard Cheney out of this either. She's out. She's being a culpa.
The Cheney family, great example. What they did with Halliburton energy companies and a war for what they knew would be profitable ends. Claimed, maybe under some good faith after September 11th, that there was an interest there, whether there were WMDs or not, that, we can at least by globalizing these places that are a threat to us and globalizing their industries and their resources, we will all make money. And that is at odds with the sort of economic nationalism, which is populist, that Bannon puts forward, that Tucker puts forward,
But-
and that I'm on board with.
But
which
you
is
know,
to protect our
on
interests.
on that idea of Iraq though, because what there was for sure, even if there wasn't necessarily wood chippers or WMDs, there was secularism and Western liberalism, a lot more, and now there's a lot less of that after we went in. That's kind of a concern I think everyone has. Is that legitimate at all? I mean, is it legitimate that we're afraid that it's not going to be made better by this? We're going to end up doing it again.
It's a concern. I don't see an alternative to allowing some level of freedom to proliferate even if it requires an American nudge. The old neocons, the original neocons, were Cold Warriors from the 1970s. This is how Wolfowitz and Pearl, they started. Abrams, it was, okay, we have an imperative, both economic and political and social, and from a security standpoint, that having a Cold War with Russia where kids had to hide behind their desks for like nuclear fallout drills, that is not in our best interest. Our best interest is a peaceful, stabilized world that trades together. Where that went a bit askew is in like McCainism, where their view, guys like him, where there's no country in the world that would not be better off with 30,000 US troops stationed there. And that is a massive bridge too far and an abrogation of our interests, because now we're creating problems. And that's what we've seen. But to push for freedom, I do believe in the original mission of Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, which is to broadcast in places an alternative to the regime, whether they like it or not. We have a good interest, a strong interest in seeing these people embrace things like democratic elections. Now, obviously, then the co-option of the Soros think tank web and the working hand in glove with the State Department and the EU and the UN, if those places were to liberalize in a good sense, they would probably take it too far pretty quickly. The answer to that is vigilance. The answer to that is a robust free media, and we have that more and more with an alternative media than a mainstream media, clearly, who are just cheerleaders for a political agenda, more and more brazenly, as we all see. Any of your viewers who are watching know it, super well.
Right.
So we just have to be vigilant and to, push for competition in these places, not co-option, not coercion, which is what the globalist left offers.
It's terrifying. And then you got, Richard Hofstadter delineating the progression of Trotskyites into neoconservatives, while the Stalinites became the modern Democrats. So we're kind of tied into that same thing: socialist tree, socialist fruit. But I guess I wanted to say, in terms of economy, because I know we're coming to the end of your hour, the economy running the states, you're right, it shouldn't be, but isn't that what it is? Aren't we at a point where the economy is running the states? Is this the Klaus Schwab we'll own nothing? Is this what's happening to lead to that?
These people live in bubbles. The same people who want to defang the Second Amendment and strip gun ownership away from a free people, which is part of our heritage, our birthright, and our constitutional republic for a reason. Those are the same people who have armed security guards. These people live in bubbles. I don't think anybody in the world, everyone's aspirational. Why do people still want to come to America from the third world? Because you can own an iPhone, because you can get your own job. If you want to, sell a fruit at a fruit stand or drive an Uber, those opportunities will exist for you in the West more than in tin pot dictatorships of the third world, or even relatively free societies in the third world like India. Now, India is growing, which is great, good for it. It's better for the world that you have India, which will be the most populous nation, moving toward more competition in the economy, because more people will be lifted from poverty as a result. But certainly the corporatism that has permeated the political class is a threat. And that's what we exposed in 16 with Trump. Trump pulled back the curtain on all this. And I said that, the rise of Trump was a direct result of 2008, 2009. Wages stagnated, 401ks got crushed, and people lost their jobs, businesses went under. But none of those who built this, engineered this, the architects
Desperate times,
ruin,
desperate measures.
Yeah, the architects of ruin economically, in the 90s, Summers and Rubin with Clinton deregulating Glass-Steagall, allowing the investment banks to lever up like crazy and get so big that they had to get bailed out. In theory, I wouldn't have bailed them out. I would have let them rot. But when their banking cabal leadership, like Hank Paulson from Goldman, as head of the Treasury, and a central bank that isn't hot to these same people, Christine Lagarde, the IMF, the ECB, that revolving door, all worked in concert to make sure the banks were never held accountable. Well, that also did help lead to the rise of Trump. The dissatisfaction, disenchantment for the first time in American history, the older generations, the say 50 to 80-year-olds, said to themselves, there's a good chance my kids and grandkids will not have a better life than I had. And whether they understood the root cause of it or not, they knew something was rotten in the system. The establishment fucked them. And that's why you had a populist rise with Brexit, with Poland and Hungary, and across Europe. New sovereigntist parties rose up. Swedish Dems, the AfD, Vox, Front National, Marine Le Pen's party in France. In Italy, two populist parties, a lefty and a righty, Five Star on the left with Beppe Grillo, and a Northern League with Salvini on the right. These things there's cause and effect here. And in Greece, where it was so heavy-handed, the takeover, the breakdown, the abrogation of their sovereignty by the EU, the reactionary forces became that much more dangerous and vitriolic. They actually became what the worry would be they would because of what the globalists and the establishment did to them. You've got the Golden Dawn Party, which has lots of neo-Nazism in it. It is a violent reactionary sort of rebuke because of the breakdown of their sovereignty. So the establishment is causing these effects. The whole idea of reactionarism, we're reacting to what they do, their overreach, their breakdown of our societies, our freedoms, our values, traditions that people are moored to. You are moored to your society, your culture, your country, your nation state, and they want to break that all down. Open borders, liberalism, and libertarianism, total open borders in Europe, just move everyone to North
swinging.
Africa. Yeah, for a cheap labor workforce. And sure, the culture's diluted and your priests are getting murdered by Islamists, but hey, diversity is the most important value to these people because it helps them dilute things like national identity, which they know is the biggest check on their globalist ambitions.
Diversity leading to homogeny. Well, okay, but you're running around the world and you're seeing people like Zoltan and Jansa, and so you're, and Michael and Nigel Farage. So do you think that there's a chance? Are you telling me there's a chance, Matt? Is there a chance? Are we going to be all right? Is it possible?
I think so. I'm a big believer. Ed Fullner, the founder of Heritage, who's a great Cold Warrior and just a good thinker and classical liberal economist. He says there are no permanent victories and no permanent defeats, and I believe that.
Nice.
It's not over until we're all in gulags. Are they getting ever closer? Yes, but that's why we have alternative media, and they're playing whack-a-mole trying to censor us and silence us. But you can't play. It's not like Poland, right? When you had Radio Free Europe broadcasting, the commies were going, house to house to try and arrest those who were, listening. But then they had systems of turning the lights on and off to like Morse code say, okay, this is going to broadcast then. The will of human beings to, their yearning to be free is more powerful. It's a more powerful sort of large scale whack-a-mole than those who are trying to press us can do. Now, lest they take away all our guns and break all of our constitutional republics and build those gulags. My father said, fought the Nazis because he was a teenager when the war broke out. He fought the communists and he fought the New York liberals when he came to the US. He said they were all the same. It's just how far along were they in building their gulags? Albeit the Nazis and commies were much further along. The New York liberals would happily put us in gulags. Look what they're doing to the January 6th protesters.
Base Leopold Tyrmand. That's so good. It's like one of the best quotes I've ever heard. Well, okay, Matt, I love you. You're one of my favorite people. Tell me where we can find some of your content. Like, where can they get some of your writings?
Well, obviously Twitter, I'm super shadow banned. I've been stuck at 45,000 for like 5 years.
Right.
They just every time I gain followers, I get smacked right back down. It's pretty funny to watch. Twitter at Matthew Tyrmand, Getter at Matthew Tyrmand, Facebook for some longer form commentary at times at my name. I'm, easy to find. And I write ad hoc, here and there.
Legit. Yeah. I mean, so guys, also he does a bunch of, other things. So check out all these connections that you can get more information from Matt and follow his work because it's amazing. You're kind of like an Indiana Jones, just seeing things. Sometimes I feel like I'm missing out. I'm like, oh, what's Matt up to? So.
Well, Facebook is always the best for where in the world am I? I like to keep it a few
right.
days behind, so whatever country I'm in, they don't arrest me. But
clever. Good idea.
that's
All right,
fun.
Matt, I will see you soon. Take care of
Thanks, dude.
yourself.
This is fun, dude.
Peace.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Targaryens.
Recent Targaryen. Recent Targaryen.